activism begins with ACT. The Russ Belville Show features the stories of hardworking grassroots activists working for an end to prohibition in today's activist agenda.
Welcome back, everybody. Half past. And today in the activist agenda, we're going to tell the stories of four people who aren't actually activists per se, but by telling their story, by going public, they help the cause of activism in our topic for today's Radical Rant, and that is highway robbery, the tale of asset forfeiture in America. We're going to talk a little bit more about how it's been increased since 9/11 and what we can do about it when we get to the rant. But right now, let's talk about the people who've directly been affected by this. As you know, the asset forfeiture is the law that allows police to seize your belongings if they're suspected of being gotten through criminal activity, whether or not you're charged with a crime or not. The inanimate object is charged with a crime and is considered guilty until you prove it innocent. You have to prove that your money or your car or your house was not gotten from drug proceeds or illegal activities. Our first story is the story of Mandrell Stewart. He and his girlfriend were driving on Interstate 66 in Virginia when a Fairfax County police cruiser pulled out of the median and raced after them. He was worried a bit because he's black and had a police record. After he was pulled over for the next 2 hours, he was detained without charges, handcuffed, and taken to the nearby police station. He was also stripped of $17,550 in cash money that he'd earned from his business, Smoking Roosters, which is a small barbecue restaurant he owned in Staunton, Virginia. Police just take his $17,500. The reason why he was pulled over is his SUV had tinted windows and had a video playing in the backseat console where he could see it. So he was never charged with a crime. Mandrell was never charged with any evidence of criminal wrongdoing. There was nothing he had been doing wrong. They didn't charge him for the tinted windows or the sightline, but they took his money because they assumed it was related to the drug trade. This is a common form of interdiction that happens on America's highways and interstates. And trying to fight to get the money back oftentimes costs more than what you're going to get back. Mandrell tried fighting this, was able to get a settlement with the government to give him half his money back, and it cost half of that for the attorney's fees that it took for him to prosecute. So he was left with about a fourth of that $17,550 from his barbecue business. Also, understand what turmoil this put Mandrell, his family, and his business through. He had no money to pay the electrical bill for his restaurant. He had no money to pay payroll to his employees and had no money to even pay the rent at his own home. Had to scramble, had to sell things just to stay afloat. Another story of highway robbery, Vincent Costello. Vincent Costello was a home improvement contractor. He and his girlfriend were traveling in May of 2010 from Queens, New York, to Florida. They were stopped on Highway 17 in Charleston County, South Carolina, because the van he was driving had a cracked windshield. The deputy who pulled him over, Mason Ashby, then began the series of what are known as rolling questions. See, when you get pulled over by a cop, the only thing the cop can do is stop you for a cause, investigate that cause, then cite, warn, or release you. Once that happens, the interaction with the police officer is done. But cops are trained in techniques to keep the conversation going, to just have a friendly, casual conversation with the driver. So long as the driver continues that conversation, the Supreme Court has ruled that that's not illegal detention. If you choose to stick around and talk to a police officer, why, that's perfectly legal. So the deputy began asking a bunch of questions that eventually began asking about whether or not he had any U.S. currency, large amounts of U.S. currency on him. Well, Costello told the deputy that the couple had visited a relative and they were heading to Pompano Beach, Florida to fix up a house they had bought in foreclosure. So they had a bunch of cash and they were going to go flip a house, basically. But as the deputy listened, he claimed he noticed the odor of marijuana. So, since he thought he smelled pot, he asked how much money did Costello have. Costello said he had $5 to $10 grand and agreed to a search because he didn't think he'd been doing anything wrong. Unfortunately, the cop, Ashby, found the $32,000 that the guy had and seized it based on the idea that it was drug money, even though he did not find any marijuana in the van. And before they left, the deputy made Costello take out the money in his pocket. According to Costello, quote, he turned around and he says, "Give me the money out of your back pocket." I said, "What if the car breaks down?" The guy has such an attitude with me. He said, "You have a debit card, go find an ATM." End quote. $32,934. Now, after trying to fight this, again, a plea deal was made for half of the money. Half of the $32,000, so he's down to $16,000, and his legal fees cost him $9,000, so that left him with $7 grand out of the $32,000. How about the story of Matt Lee from Clare, Michigan? This was in 2011 at Humboldt County, Nevada. Now, Matt Lee was 31 years old, college graduate, but was struggling to find work. It's a tough job market, and he'd moved back in with his folks. A friend had promised him a job as a sales rep in California if he could get there and set up, a place to live and so forth. So Matt asked his father for a loan. His dad gave him $2,500 in cash and a 10-year-old Pontiac Bonneville to drive out there. As Lee is passing through the Nevada desert, he runs into Humboldt County Sheriff's Deputy L.A. Dove, who's a member of the Canine Drug Interdiction Team. Dove asked Lee whether he was carrying any currency and summoned the drug dog. Dove, the cop, told Lee to get out of the car and stand at the edge of the desert while the dog sniffed for drugs. The deputy told Lee that he didn't believe his story that he was moving to California because he had so little luggage on him. Of course, the drug dog alerts, the search happens, and the cop finds $2,400 in cash. When he finds it, Dove, the cop, and his fellow cop, his partner, exchanged high fives. The cop claims that Lee was involved in a drug run, took the money, and left Lee with only the $151 in his pocket. But lucky for him, it wasn't like Vincent Costello, and the cops make him take all the money out of his pocket as well. How about the story of Jose Cristobal Guerrero of Raleigh, North Carolina? He was stopped by cops in DeKalb County, Georgia. He had just visited his brother's suburban Atlanta home to pick up his two nephews from Atlanta and take them to Mexico to see their grandfather. Police pulled him over in his Tahoe SUV. Now, Guerrero is a Mexican national, but he has permanent resident status in the United States. He's a construction foreman and once served as a church deacon. The DeKalb, Georgia cop, Mike DeWald, had been watching Guerrero's brother's home as part of an ongoing investigation into one of the tenants there. DeWald, the cop, asked Guerrero a few questions, and Guerrero described his family's travel plans and said he was carrying $13,630. Police brought a canine to the scene, and of course the dog alerts. The officers empty out the family's suitcases onto the pavement. No drugs are found, but when the cop finds the money, he seized it. That $13,630 was the life savings of Jose Guerrero and was intended to pay for land in Mexico and bills for his family in Mexico. Ultimately, the prosecutors agreed to return all the money back to Guerrero, but only if he signed an agreement that he would not sue the police or prosecutors. He signed the agreement and received his $13,630 in 2008, 3 years after the money had been seized. Hope the land was still available there, Jose. These are 4 real-life stories of asset forfeiture. These were reported in the Washington Post on September 8th. The series is called, the article's called "They Fought the Law, Who Won?" and is part of a great series in the Washington Post, a five or six part series, I believe, that explains just how this asset forfeiture's gone out of control. The most important thing you can take away from this is to know your rights in a traffic stop. They can pull you over for pretext. They can pull you over for, missing light, no blinker, whatever it is, but they can only keep you detained for as long as it takes to deal with that stop. After that, they have to engage in that casual conversation, and you have the right to decline and ask whether you're free to go. Am I free to leave? If you've handed over your license and registration to a cop and he's come back and handed your license and registration back to you with or without a warning or ticket, you're done. It's time to leave. It's time for you to ask, am I free to go? And if you are free to go, it's time to drive away. And they will try talking to you as you drive away, because we have this habit of wanting to not be rude and leave a conversation in the middle. Be rude. When you get your license and registration back, now don't leave without asking. But do ask, am I free to go? And they do have to tell you if you are free to go. So please do. Keep in mind that if you agree to a search, that search is legal. You must always decline searches. If they say, well, we'll just go get the drug dog, that's when you start asking, am I free to go? Now, I do not consent to any searches. Am I free to go? They cannot keep you detained for an unreasonable length of time in order to get the drug dog. Another thing I would highly recommend is if you have a cell phone, to put it in some sort of recording mode, audio or audio video if you can, to not only get exactly what's going on in your interaction with the officer, but to time how long the stop takes. That's another factor. The Supreme Court has ruled there cannot be an excessive length of time in keeping you detained. Also, keep in mind that you do not need to admit to anything that you're carrying, cash, drugs, or anything, but you cannot lie about it either. You cannot say, I don't have any money in the car, I don't have any drugs in the car, because then if they do find those things in the car, they are going to use that against you as lying or obstruction. Always just respond to questions by officers by other questions, with other questions. Questions like, I'm sorry, can I speak to an attorney before I answer that question? I'm sorry, I don't speak to police officers without my attorney present. I'm sorry, what does this have to do with me being pulled over tonight? Whatever it might be, do not answer those questions. They will be used against you in a court of law. We're going to talk more about this asset forfeiture coming up in the Radical Rant. Desert Snow, Black Asphalt, and the 420 Group, some names you need to know. Stick around. We're back after the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.